The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Get more at servingworlds.com. 22. An explosion lit up the blackness, the first of several. The tender automatically reduced light penetration through the cockpit windows and swung its nose into the shock wave that would surely follow. The ship faced upwards now at another Reacher ship at the far top side of the diamond pattern. Tall, rib-shaped columns designed for large-scale infold construction and ship repair rose from the flat rectangular hull of the Vengeance. Or they used to. Sensors on board Willard's tender captured every instant of the ship's demise as it fell prey to an invisible whip of gravity. One last blow from the dying churn that cleaved the ship in half. The front half of Vengeance disintegrated into a cloud of glittering pieces. Atmospheric gases and fuel sparked more explosions in the cloud. The back half accelerated faster and faster towards the equator-like central plane of the small bubble of space-time and collapsed under sun-crushing pressures into tiny accretions of matter when it touched the edges of the fold that carried them all. What was left of the front half of Vengeance was hurled forward. Willard screamed the warnings with his implants and with his voice. He screamed even as he jockeyed T5 out of the way of the cloud of burning, collapsing spaceship. And he screamed more after dozens of pieces of what had been Vengeance stabbed through the Harrison. It took 21 seconds for Vengeance's corpse to cross 80-odd kilometers of fold and stab into Harrison's heart, ending her and her crew's existence. Willard experienced every instant in crystal-clear resolution. He wanted to throw up. He wanted to cry. He wanted to piddle in his flight suit. He wanted to turn tail and fly back to the cloak and hide. He flipped his eyes through the electromagnetic spectrum, recording the death throes of the Harrison and her crew. Explosions and plasma arcs from failing engines. Warm bodies turning cold and hard as ice in the vacuum. Pleas from pockets of survivors choking the comms channels. Ops, request additional tenders to search for survivors. There are compartments that didn't breach, but we have to move now. Negative, T5. The voice of Ops was choked and raw now, but ugly with command. Repeat negative. Stand by for special deployment. Ops? Harrison survivors need evac now. Upon hearing its pilot name a ship, the tender's flight computer, oh so helpfully, displayed an information packet for the repurposed gas-liquid tanker, including the crew complement. 577 souls. Willard squeezed his flesh and blood eyes shut as if that would block the data filling the virtual reality he was interfacing. It didn't. Hauling himself out of the pilot's chair did. He kept his eyes shut as the feeds from cameras, sensors, and onboard computers disappeared from his prefrontal cortex. And he waited another half-second while his body stopped and started breathing again before opening his eyes. He was back in the tender's cockpit, back inside his skull again. The space narrowed into a curving tip not far ahead. Control panels and screens lined the nose and stretched all the way to the window that stretched above him. Matching windows covered most of the left and right of the small pilot's compartment. The co-pilot's chair was folded into the wall to the right, and Lieutenant Bowen stood in that spot and stared out the window. "We go on," Bowen said without looking back, and without a trace of the cocky attitude he'd worked so hard to perfect. "On," Willard agreed, around a lump in his throat. "T5, what is your status? Lieutenant Sue, we've lost your feeds, report!" Willard heard the panic and genuine concern in the voice and grimaced. He forced himself to sit back down, but he kept the back of his skull away from the matching plate on the headrest, only slipping one wrist into the shallow groove on the chair's arm. He wanted to stay in the cockpit with his friend Bone a little while longer, thank you very much. The weaker implant on the inside of his wrist was contact enough to confirm his life signs and remind the ship's sensors to keep sending data back home. "I have a green board, Ops. Say again, T5 is good to go. The pilot, though? Willard stared past Bowen's shoulder at the tumbling graveyard. "He needs a second." A moment's silence, and the voice came back, less intense. "Understood, Angel," the woman said, and her voice said that she did. "Stay safe. It's a crowded sky. Newly crowded now. Stand by for special deployment." Willard swallowed hard. "Acknowledged, Ops." How much was too much to take? Willard asked that question a lot. Too much. He pushed it out of his head on a breath of air, filled his lungs and held it, and repeated, until the pain in his heart eased a little. He thought of Elena, back on reach, safe for the moment, and the pain eased a little more. Both men stared out the wraparound windows of the tender's cockpit module. Small chunks of debris echoed off the ship's hull every so often. The tender's autopilot moved the ship now and then to avoid bigger chunks. They stared in silence, and eventually the folks in back rang the doorbell. "Lieutenants, what's happening? Why aren't we moving?" Thanks to the tender's spanking new gravity drive, reversed engineered from studying field dynamics at play in the churn of past folds, the boys in the back had no clue what had just happened. No clue what had just been lost. The ride had been that smooth. Willard let Bowen answer. He turned his back to his friend to look out the left window and rub the wet from his eyes. He watched the distant red and orange streaks of plasma flit by, illuminating the spherical shape of the massive folds surrounding them all. Bowen finished speaking, and the boys and girls in back didn't ask any more questions. "Ops to T5. Deployment orders to follow. You are ordered to make best speed to Ryson and make secure her crew for transfer. This comes directly from Fleet Commodore Kagan, Angel. Further instructions to be provided upon arrival." "Ryson?" Willard flashed a questioning expression at Bowen. Bowen shrugged back. "Not to reason why, am I right?" "Ours is definitely not to reason why," Willard thought silently. Fighting bone-deep exhaustion, he leaned his head back against the chair's interface contact, and the world as he saw it through his eyes went away. "Acknowledged, Ops. Report to Ryson. Secure crew, further orders to follow. T5, en route." You have been listening to Reach, The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Music, All This by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Hear more of the story at servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.